Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Rabid Dog House. I'm your host, Justin Steele. Here in the house, we like to talk about lost gems that horror audiences may have forgotten all about. On tonight's episode, we are going to be talking about the 1977 film Looking for Mr. Goodbar, directed by Richard Brooks, starring the fearless and amazing Diane Keaton in a tour de force performance as a woman who is a beloved school teacher by day and a sexual barfly by night. The film is a dramatic examination of a woman's descent into hell, ultimately leading to a dizzying and disturbing climax. Also starring Richard Gere and Tuesday Weld, Looking for Mr. Goodbar is not to be missed. Joining us in the house tonight is my very special guest, Zena Dixon. All right, thanks everybody for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog House, and thanks again to my special guest, Zena. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'm really excited to dissect and talk about this movie that has stuck with me for over 10 years now. You know, an event that happened, true story of Roseann Quinn, a woman who was a teacher by day and sort of this sexualized barfly by night. It all came together with Judith Rossner's 1975 novel, I believe, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, the story of Theresa Dunn and her descent and struggle into this sort of madness, duplicitous lifestyle, struggling at a time in history where the sexual revolution was coming out, feminism, the rights of women, understanding what that means to different people, but her struggle finding a balance that she could find in her own life. But it's a tragic story. I'm going to let viewers know right ahead, right off the bat, that we're going to give you spoilers in this episode. I went into this movie knowing what was going to happen. I mean, not just because I read the book, but even the book starts off, the first few pages tells you the aftermath of the climax of the story, and you're kind of reading it and it's horrifying, but then the book goes right into the story, backtracks to her days in college, and you almost forget for a minute that this is going to happen, that this event, you're kind of like, what was that thing at the beginning? Because it doesn't make sense. This is this different story I'm reading now, and it's a very graphic story about this woman's expression of sexuality, but her determination to stay herself. And ultimately, then when you get to the last few pages of the novel, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, it's happening. Oh no, here we go. And the movie takes a different approach. You know, you start right from the main story of her in college, but the movie is directed in a way that, if you know going in, like Zena, for instance, was not familiar with the story. So I wanted her to watch it going in blindly, and I think ultimately we're led to this horrifying, disturbing. Zena used the word disturbing, which is the perfect word. Before we started filming, Zena mentioned the word disturbing, and it's the perfect word for what happens in this ending. But, you know, it's the story played by Diane Keaton of Theresa Dunn, a woman who was murdered in New York City. The aftermath, I'll kind of fill you all in. But Zena, you know, tell us, what were some of your initial impressions and what did you think of the movie overall leading up to the end and then that ending?
Well, first, great job on recommending this movie. I know that you actually been recommending it to me for a while now, so I'm really happy that I was able to check it out. Kind of like what we talked before we started recording and everything. I really truly found this movie disturbing, and it was difficult to watch, but at the same time, it's also kind of hard to analyze completely, because even though while I was watching, I felt that, okay, I know what's going to happen, you know, ultimately, but you know, it's kind of like it's somewhat repetitive, and you keep seeing the character Theresa dig herself into such a hole. That's kind of how I feel. And I say that because, you know, she had a pretty awesome job. She was a teacher, you know, teaching children. It seemed like she truly enjoyed her job. She knew how to keep it separate. She even mentioned it at one point that her nightlife started to affect her daytime life.
Absolutely.
You know? So I like the fact that she was keeping it separate, but at the same time, what she was doing at night, just bringing home random strangers, of course it's going to catch up to her. Like, I'm just thinking, we all have that stubborn friend. We all have that friend where it's like they don't quite get it. They don't want to be told what to do. And, you know, it's happened. It happens. And it's just like sometimes we, not even just as a woman, but as people, we may feel a little bit invincible sometimes, you know? Like, imagine bringing home a crazy. Imagine bringing home a guy that you never want to even talk to again. I couldn't imagine, you know? But she would constantly, just repetitively, just keep doing it. And it's like she just had this unhealthy type of like need, you know, to just randomly find just sex, you know, with anyone, you know, that's just pretty much it. And so it was kind of difficult to watch because it's like a part of me kind of felt like, okay, she's going to end up getting in trouble, if not, you know, murdered in some type of way, in a horrible way. Because, you know, with her going down this path, of course, that's what's going to happen. You could just instantly see it. So it even though it's like it was hard to like watch the movie, it makes me want to read the book to have like a better understanding, because I feel, even though this movie was about 2 hours, 10 minutes,
yeah,
or so, it was a very lengthy movie, but it doesn't even feel that like it's 2 hours. You know, you kind of see her gradually change. She goes through these like different types of personalities, I feel. But she never quite become better. Like, in a way, it's like you think that she's going to get strong. You think that she's going to say, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. You know, even with the one guy who had an interest in her, James.
James, played by William Atherton. Yep.
Yes, he had an interest in her, and she just didn't want it until he told her a lie. Then, you know, magically she's really into that. But yeah, just day by day, it's like she continues going after these men who are just like troubled or risky. So leading up to the last 10 minutes, you know, I kind of felt like something was going to happen, but I was rooting for her, honestly and truly, because it was just a complete tragedy. It was disturbing. You know, as much horror movies as I watch, this was still very difficult to watch because, as you said, it is real life horror.
Yeah.
You know, and it's unfortunate because, you know, sometimes, you know, many people, they meet strangers every day and, you know, have one night stands or do whatever the case may be. But because of this, like, she's killed ultimately, you know,
Yeah.
and
in a brutal and horrifying way, you know.
yes, and it's like it's so unfortunate because she's naive, you know, and it's like you can truly see that she doesn't mean it, you know, she doesn't mean
Yeah.
it. She thinks that she's fine. I think eventually she would have grown out of it.
I think so too.
She probably even would have went back to the guy James or a guy like him and start building like that type of relationship. But it's like she knew that these guys were sketchy, and that's what's crazy, you know. These men are just unhealthy, and then even after the abortions, and you know, it's just like all these things that are coming, and yet she's never learned, and then she doesn't mind that she's kind of like a doormat. So but again, just going back, it's like I've had friends who were super stubborn, just like her. I think that we all have.
Yeah.
And
it almost makes it worse to tell them, hey, this is what you should do, or why don't we try
right.
this? They'll even rebel more against
Exactly.
it and do something even more destructive.
So sometimes it's like that's even the thing. What do you do in that situation? Do you stand by and just be there for them, or you know, do you let go and hope for the best? You know, because sometimes you don't want to, you know, deal with that. You know, and it's again, it's unfortunate because I'm trying to like pick my words wisely.
Sure.
Because I'm not trying to sound insensitive. But even you know, when she starts dating like the married college professor, with that, fine. Let's just say, hey, it's just kind of like a fling, even though she's acting a little crazy. Fine, it's a fling. We'll let it go. And plus, she's kind of young. But then it's just after that, she just again just full blown, and then just going in deeper. She even accepts money, you know, and she's just, and even when she's telling the stories, she is kind of like boasting, you know, like she's really excited about it, like she's proud. Yeah. I don't understand. And so even though I keep on bringing up, she's kind of like that friend that we all have. This is why I no longer have a friend like that. But I truly had a friend who honestly was very similar to Theresa. And it's unfortunate. Luckily, this did not happen to her, but it
Right.
got down to a point where it's like, I don't want to hear about this anymore, you know? And it would scare me, you
Yeah,
know?
it affects you. It starts to leak out onto your life, you know?
But yeah, again with that ending, even with the troubled guy, like the final guy that
Yeah.
she's with.
Scary.
Yeah, it's Gary at first looked like, he seemed normal. he seemed normal, but that's the thing, you can't really
You can't
obviously.
tell just by looks. You're right. That's the scary part, that look, Judith Rossner coming up with the title, from my research, things I understand, coming up with the title, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, is the idea of like, it could be anybody. Mr. Goodbar is, it's supposed to be sort of like a sort of cover up for like looking for Mr. Good time,
Got it.
and, but he could be anybody. He could be this good guy, bad guy, up, down, left, right. And I'll say just, going from the novel to the movie, but starting before that, Roseann Quinn, yes, she she did have this sort of duplicitous life. By day she was a school teacher, and she was a really good school teacher. Fellow teachers had said the kids loved her. She was beloved and gentle. And I think like what the book and the movie shows, because Judith Rossner struggled at first writing about Theresa, well, about Roseann Quinn, who from here on out we'll refer to as Theresa, just from the movie and book, but coming up with the character Theresa, because she said she felt judgmental. She felt like, this woman was asking for it in a way. And then once she started to like dig deeper, because like you were saying with like a friend, I've also had people like that in my life, and you do want to like, you want to help them. You can't help but judge them, but it's not like mean judging. It's like trying to like get them to make a different choice, get them to look at things differently. But it is, judging. You don't want to enable, etc. But she struggled at first, and then she kind of started learning about like the scoliosis that Theresa had when she was a little girl, and how it isolated her from her family for like a year. She was like put on display, and she was in the living room, and people just walked by her, and they would acknowledge her, but most of the time just treat her almost like she wasn't there. And she is also the middle child, where she kind of gets lost anyway. But as she grew up, I think she was always the perfect girl. She wasn't, there's the older sister, Catherine, who's like sort of the golden child of the family, but she's a mess in and of herself. She's married to this guy. She's having a bi-coastal affair with one guy in California, one guy in New York, and she's having abortion after abortion. She's into drugs, etc. And Tuesday Weld plays the character of Catherine, who she was nominated for an Oscar for this role for Best Supporting Actress. And Diane Keaton also was, she won the Oscar that year for Annie Hall. But I feel like her performance in Looking for Mr. Goodbar affected that. I have to believe that because it's such a tour de force. But Theresa, she was the perfect girl, but she could kind of see that like surface is all that people judge by. So even though Catherine is like this tragic mess, her family just her father doesn't believe Theresa. She stays out all night with her sister. She comes home, and her father's kind of like, "Where have you been? Catherine's not home. You're lying, you're lying." And so Theresa moves out, but she was with her sister all night. And the moment the sister tells the dad, "Oh no, she was with me last night, we're partying," he's like, "Oh, okay." Like he couldn't believe Theresa. So she's sort of this character. It sets up this sort of psychological issues. And then she finally meets this guy, what love is about, with this college professor who ends up being a jerk.
Right.
He's kind of like he's a very selfish guy. And it's sort of, she kind of becomes that with James later on, the James character, where he's sort of like the mopey one following her around. And she even comments at one point, like something he says to her, she had said to the professor. And she's kind of like, I realize now how dumb that is, even though it's a very sweet sentiment about romance and love. And Roseann Quinn, it was noted by neighbors and witnesses after the fact that she did choose these men that were rough and criminals and violent. There were a couple of times now in the movie, the sister takes on that role, who like witnesses Tony being violent with her and these noises. But in real life, the neighbors would hear it, and she would come out with like a bloody face, bloody nose, black eye, and she kept choosing these men. And ultimately, we only have so much information about the case because John Wayne Wilson, who was the actual murderer, he committed suicide in jail like 6 days after he was caught. So we'll never have a full thing. He did give a testimony, but in his testimony, which is the beginning of the book, he's basically like, she taunted him. She almost was like asking him to kill her. Like he makes it sound like she's basically like, do it. So in the movie, they kind of say that she says that in the line, but it's almost like she's saying, do it, like just go ahead and have sex with me because just get it over with and go. But he's interpreting that as do it because he has this knife in his hand as like do it, kill me. So in the book, when you start off, he's basically saying she wanted it, she wanted me to do this, which is totally messed up. But these were the kind of guys she was like turned on by, these guys that weren't like as educated or had the same dialogue that she would have. But ultimately, what happened. In the book, again, you find that out very quickly, but the movie, it's over time. But she does have that sort of, I think, towards by the end of the movie with her relationship with Richard Gere and Tony, she's definitely starting to like change her mind about this life. But then ultimately, she's like, I'm gonna go out for one last hurrah, and she chooses this guy. Now, in the movie, we're given glimpses of the Gary character, played by Tom Berenger, that like there's a scene where they go to this gay club and he is in the background and he's kind of dancing and stuff. And she's like, I think in real life, the truth is somewhere in the middle. And she was kind of like taunting him about it, or at least that's what he said. But I think she really just wanted him to go. He came up to the house or to the apartment. They met each other at this bar, Tweeds, it was called. And she had this rule, and this is very clear in the movie, by day, you got to go. You can't stay here. Even with Tony, like 6 a.m., I've got to get some sleep. But she would like go to sleep. She couldn't get to sleep unless she had some sort of drug or sex or whatever. But during the day, she had to have that very direct line between her two lives. And he really wanted a place to stay, which is the whole character himself, John Wayne Wilson, or Gary in the movie. He was married in real life, had a family, came from Florida, went up to New York. He met this gay man who took him in. They had a relationship, but mainly he was just trying to like find a place to live or to be, even though he abandoned his wife who was pregnant and all this horrible stuff. Right. But like, so he was really just looking for a place to stay for the night. And she was like, no, like I have to get you out of here, and it spiraled into this horrifying scene. And in real life, he stabbed her like 17 times. Jesus. There's a line in the movie where he says, you candle effer. And that's because in real life, he, it's so hard to say, he stuffed a candle up inside of her after the fact, and he covered her with the blanket. She had this sort of bust thing that was like above her. He had like smashed her head in with it. So horrifying. And ended up, my cats are hissing, sorry. But she ended up, he snuck off. There was no DNA at the time. They didn't have, there wasn't a way to really catch him, but he told his lover, the gay lover, that this had happened. The guy sent him away, but then when the guy, the lover was under suspicion, or, the police were coming after him, he finally gave him up. So it was like a fluke. But then John Wayne Wilson was in prison or in jail, and he was basically saying, I'm going to kill myself. I want to kill myself. And I guess a police officer threw some sheets into the thing, and he's like, okay, use these then. And he did. And it's like, I mean, this guy did a horrifying thing, and it's horrible. But I think, and it's hard to say this after I've just said this, but I do think that we can learn things from criminals in jail. Like, there's stuff to be learned. We watch all these serial killer documentaries and stuff. Like, we could have learned something about what went wrong with this kid, this guy. And there are a couple books, like Looking for Mr. Goodbar is the main one, but afterwards, there's like a book called Closing Time, which kind of follows up with it, tells you what happened afterwards. And it is a really interesting read. But we were talking before the episode, and I do want to just emphasize, because I feel like I've started babbling all of a sudden, but I do want to emphasize that there's real life horror, you and I, we're clearly fans of horror, and I've been learning the kind of horror that you like, and I enjoy that kind too, as well as I'm a middle of the road guy in terms of, I definitely love like the Halloween, Friday the 13th, that sort of thing, or Stephen King. I definitely love middle of the road stuff, but I also like independent horror and this and that. But also these real life horrors, I don't know what it is about it, but they get me in a way differently than the other ones. Like an American Crime starring Ellen Page. You know, it's a true story about Sylvia Likens, who was, you know, shoved into this basement by this woman with all these kids who was very mentally imbalanced. Or there were the Ken and Barbie doll killers. These are stories I have no shame in saying, like, kept me awake for nights afterwards. And looking for Mr. Goodbar was one of those for me that, even though I knew what was going to happen, when I saw that ending with the strobe light effects and just it's her face in the end and the suffering of this woman who is a strong character, who is naive, who is blindly going through. I think you're right. I don't often think of it as her being stubborn, but now that you've said that, I do kind of think of it as like that sort of her internal struggle of why can Catherine get away with this and I can't? Or, you know, why do I have to end up like Bridget, the other sister, who's like married and having child after child? You know, even though it's hurting me, why can't I do exactly what I want?
Mm-hmm.
But going on specifically to the movie, though, what did you think about Diane Keaton's performance?
Oh man, I have to say, I think that this is probably one of her best
Yeah.
performances that I've seen. Like she has such a range, and I always knew that she was a great actress, but she's just amazing. Like when she would scream, it's like, man, it
Oh,
would give me
horrifying.
chills. You know, it's like she's not in a like comedy type of role, you know, or where she's just someone's girlfriend, and you know, because usually she would do movies like that. So it's kind of it's really cool to see, you know, and even to see her the way she interacts with the children. So when she goes out at night, so she's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's a tour de force. Now, the first movie I ever remember seeing Diane Keaton in was The First Wives Club,
Oh
which is
yeah.
such a different portrayal. You know, it's such a different character. And Richard Gere in it, I think, was really. It's so funny because of his career too, where he became like this romantic lead, but started off with this like ignorant, tough guy, you know, he definitely almost caricature, but even he has a little bit of like, you could still, and I mean, it's easy to say this, you know, in retrospect, but you could see that sort of like je ne sais quoi that he has of like, he's going to become something.
Right.
But what did you think when you saw Richard Gere in it?
Oh my gosh, I thought it was funny because I've never seen him as well, like with a role like that,
Yeah,
the role that he was doing, and the way he was talking too. I mean, sometimes he would make me laugh. I don't know, it was supposed to be funny, but
right.
so
No,
that was
yes, yes, yes.
okay, good. So that was a good like comic relief. But yeah, it was really great seeing him as well. I like when I saw they both were in the movie, I was just like, "Whoa, really? God, they must." This is probably when they first started, and they're
Oh
probably
yeah.
just like a side character. That's what I thought. But yeah, I was very wrong in a good way.
and and LeVar Burton seeing LeVar like you know I grew up on Reading Rainbow, PBS Reading Rainbow. So to see him in such a young character, you know, I remember seeing him in Roots, so I knew that he had definite acting chops. But I really liked his sort of like quiet performance because it's like set up to be like this guy, you know, watch out for him. But then he ends up being like a hero. You know, it doesn't save her life. It doesn't change anything, but it's one of those moments that Theresa, as an educated woman, she'll look and be like, you know, there are guys out there. Again, it goes back to the whole idea of like you can't tell just by surface stuff who a person is.
Right.
I do like though the idea of though like the masculine versus the feminism. You know, in my own hindsight of this story with the character of John Wayne Wilson or Gary in the movie, he you know, his idea was like she emasculated him, and we almost encourage men, you know, to what it means to be masculine. You know, masculine traits are aggressive, sexual, whereas the feminine's supposed to be passive, not sexual. Well, as a masculine guy, aggressive, sexual, aggressive sex, rape. Like, so of course it leads to these sort of ideas, and it's kind of like, yes, we as individuals need to take accountability, but society does, you know, instigate that we become these sort of ideological roles that may or may not be the best for us. And I think Theresa really struggled to find, is she this, you know, sweet teacher by day, or is she this woman who's willing to prostitute herself for fun? But you know, as somebody who's in the horror fan, you know, were you scared at all at the end when you watched it? Like me, the first time, I was like, it's happening, it's happening. Like I got nervous, but I'm curious as to what like you felt by the end.
See, I actually, even though it's like I knew it was coming again, I feel like I keep saying it, but it's like I couldn't prepare myself for it, and it kind of it freaked me out. So you were talking about some disturbing moments
Yes.
with movies that you would watch as well. There's this movie called Megan is Missing. I don't know if you've ever seen that one. It's
No,
kind of
but I've heard of it.
like a first well, I don't want to say first camera. I don't want to say like documentary type of style, but kind of like a found footage type of movie. And it doesn't have the highest budget or anything like that, but that's the type of movie that you would show a teenage girl or a young girl, even preteens that feels like, oh, I'm a little Miss Grony Pants or something, as an example.
Yeah.
And that movie, especially, it kind of reminded me of this. It's nowhere of the same. I'm not saying that, but as far as it goes, where it's just kind of like this, but then the ending is just like all over the place. So that's pretty much the same thing with Megan is Missing.
Yeah.
This movie, though, like just the overall look of it, like the cinematography, the music, the acting, just the talent, it's just incredible, and then again, even with the ending, it was just such a tragic ending. It's like I could not prepare myself for it.
Yeah.
And it freaked me out in a way where it's like, okay, this is real life, and that's the unfortunate truth. So I mean, I would actually like recommend this movie to people, and I think that it's probably best for them to go in blind. Even if you know what it's about, but obviously I would never tell them the ending or anything like that. Even as we're talking about it, I still feel like people need to experience it. If you have
I think it's an experience. It's hard. I was thinking about this. I was about to stop even before we started talking, and I was thinking about like, it's hard for me to say, like, it's an obstacle, I think, we as like horror critics, to say like, oh, this is such a great movie about this woman who is brutally murdered. It's a weird thing to say,
Right.
and it is a challenge to sometimes be like, I got to find that middle. But you're right. Like I said, it starts off almost cheesy, and it's all a trick to the audience because you all of a sudden become invested in Theresa as a character. You are like, don't do that, or, oh, come on, get out of there. But she is a strong woman. She's just misguided and it's because she's at this time in history where it's like, all of a sudden she has these choices they didn't know that they would have women at a time, and she's kind of stuck. Which road do I take? And unfortunately, she took one step too far. I do think she was about to change. I think she was about to, like, I don't know if it would have happened overnight, but I think she was at the end of that. And because we all have, I mean, in my 20s, I definitely had wild times. I'm not a big drinker now, but I definitely had the stamina then to like have a few shots in this. And there were times where I was in situations that were potentially harmful, where I'm like walking to my car and who knows who could have came out from the shadows and attacked me. And this is a story of like a woman who not only had to deal with that, but also she's inviting them up into her home and her house. But I think it's a story that people, especially young women, should see as sort of a tale of caution. And I feel like that's hard to say without some sort of condescension, like, oh, I'm older and you know better. But like, I think it's an effective movie. This is a movie that sticks with you and lingers, and I'll never forget that ending, because you start to think it's going to be almost like one kind of story.
Mm-hmm.
And unless, of course, you know what happens, it very then, because it can happen at any second. It is kind of like, bam, it gets you.
Something I was going to say too, like, and this is just like a thought because with you bringing it up, I love the fact that you brought up, because I didn't really like get a chance to like even say that. Not that I'm trying to sound like, oh, I'm just better than everybody. Not at all. But like, I love the fact that you brought up where, again, obviously she wanted to make her own choices, right? And she wanted this lifestyle. What I find confusing, or where it's just like, okay, why not be a little bit more careful with that? She would take them home. Like, you could take them anywhere, like maybe go to their place or maybe a hotel or, but no, it was just your house. Your house. It's just like, wow, like just, you never even thought, I know she's, this is like just a movie or, and everything. We're not even just a movie, but with us just talking about the movie, I kind of think about those things because I'm truly trying to understand where her mindset is coming from.
Well, I think like with her taking them home, it was the wrong choice, and it shows like you can't trust anything. But I'm sure in some sort of misguided way, she probably thought like, this is my turf. If I'm going to be doing these things without control, it's at least I can control the setting, which obviously did not work to her favor. And that in and of itself is a lesson to learn. But I bet she was thinking like, this is my home, I'll be able to kick that. And, her examples were guys, with the exception of James, all the men in her life were guys that wanted to leave. So she was almost sort of preempting that. She was preemptive to their leaving by taking control. Fine, if you're all going to leave, then I'm going to kick you out first, and that way I don't get hurt. And I'm sure she was hurt, but she buried that down to be like, no, you know what, I'm fine, this is my life. And then she almost believed it to be true. But again, that's ultimately what what destroyed her, what was definitely because she thought she had the control, and all of a sudden this guy, it was a frenzy of he took the control over. And that whole that ending where you can see it starts off, it almost seems like it's going to be another one of her typical experiences. He's obviously can't perform, and he's like almost blaming her for it, and she is sort of being, it's okay, why don't we just say goodnight, it's fine. She wanted it, but then she was kind of like, I'm okay if I don't get it tonight. But then it slowly starts to rise, and you don't know what suffering a person goes through or why certain things trigger, a certain act or path. And I think Theresa was constantly trying to understand that about herself and about others. But I'm glad that you'd recommend it. I guess I think you're right to go in blind. I think that people can go in either way. Now that's the lesson I'm learning. You pretty much said the things that I usually get. I mean, a very generalized. Everybody has different opinions about it. But going in blindly or having the knowledge, there's no way to really prepare somebody. So you can literally be like, well, this happened A, B, C, D, and people still, when they're seeing it, at least I think, when you're seeing it happen, you're kind of like, oh my gosh. But like the whole movie in itself, it depends how you look at it. It's not a traditional horror movie. It's not even a traditional true life story. Then it becomes the purest form of horror for me, which is like a person in a situation, and whether they get out or not, it shows the most destructive parts of human nature and what we can do to each other. Horror fans that are part of Wicked Horror or this or that, you should know going in that it's not like a suspenseful movie overall. You don't watch it like that, but there is a payoff in the end, if that's what a payoff for horror fans. But it's still an interesting movie. In my opinion, it's a horrifying story, and
I love the fact that you have more knowledge and that you read the book and you've done research, and I just feel like I'm missing definitely a chunk. Like, sure. I'm just curious.
If I hadn't read the book first and saw this movie, I don't know. I could never answer how I would have taken it. I wanted to hear somebody who loves the genre like I do and their interpretation of a film like this. I wasn't really surprised that the word you used to describe it was difficult. It's a difficult movie. For a lot of different reasons. It makes you think about things, but also like it's a visually difficult movie to watch. Disturbing, though. When we started filming, that was the word you used that I think sums it up.
Thank you again for choosing this movie. Like, I'm really excited that I was able to check it out. Like, this is a movie I never I haven't seen before, so it's really great. I don't know how soon I'll watch it again, just being honest.
Well, I think I put it away for 10 years. Right. I couldn't watch it again for a long time. I was captivated by it, and I wanted to know all the information, and then I'm like, no. Like when I mentioned American Crime, I can't watch that movie again. I think Ellen Page from Juno does an amazing job, but I can't watch that movie again. I can't. It's one of those. But that's also, in my opinion, that could be a good movie in of itself. That's a good reason to watch a certain kind of movie. And thanks everybody for watching another episode of the Rabid Dog House. What are some of your favorite real life true crime thrillers? Thanks for joining me, Zena. Always a pleasure to have you. And again, I'm your host, Justin Steele. You can find me at Wicked Horror, 411 Pop Culture, or on Twitter at Wicked Horror Justin. And this is the Zena Dixon. You can find her also on Wicked Horror, Dread Central, or RealQueenofHorror.com. Sincerely, Zena, thanks for watching Looking for Mr. Goodbar and letting me know what you think.
Thank you so much.
And we'll see y'all soon. Have a good one.